Hey everyone, today I'll be doing an overview of the computer that we'll be using for our Winter Overclock 2010. Here is the system that will be used for Wintertime Overclock 2010. This is at least one of them anyway. This is something I just recently slapped together. It's a socket 939 setup. It currently has an Athlon 64, 3200 plus CPU in it, which is clocked at 2 GHz. I have a 3400 plus CPU up here on one of these dead motherboards on the wall. I'm not sure if it works or not, but I'll have to find out. I'll stick it on an extra motherboard and see if it works or not. If it does, I'll stick it in that computer because it runs at 2.2 gig, which I believe both these CPUs are based off the Venice core, so that gives them that means it's usually a good overclocking CPU. And it's got the power supply. It was in the MidTower Deluxe earlier this year before I got the cherry red one. It's got a modified Sunbeam Silent Whisper heat pipe cooler. It currently has 1 gig of RAM. I'm going to take 512 out of it and put it into the Black Max because it's starving for memory and it's running Vista. I have 512 megs of RAM in this thing. I'm going to run XP on this computer. And here's the cool part about this system. A motherboard. DFI nForce 4 LANParty SLI motherboard. It's a really nice board. It's probably one of the best socket 939 boards available. I mean, it's based off the NVIDIA chipset. It's got SLI, and of course, being a 939, you can run dual channel. It's got SATA RAID, which the higher end model of this motherboard has the built-in NVIDIA NV RAID plus Silicon image RAID, so you have like 8 serial ATA ports on the highest model of this board. Which this is not the highest model, but still it could have like up to 8 SATA drives and RAID plus 2 IDE drives and your optical drives. That's a lot of system drives. Anyway, very nice looking board. I mean, it's got this black PCB and it's got yellow expansion slots, the PCI Express and the PCI. And of course you got your nForce 4 single chip. It's a very nice laid out board. It's got heat sinks on pretty much all the MOSFETs, which gives you makes it much more stable for overclocking. And this board here is aimed for overclocking, just to say, fixing to find out in the BIOS. Do a little run through. Alright, now I'm going to enter the BIOS. Alright. Of course, this is your standard CMOS features. Pretty much same as usual. Advanced BIOS features where you can set boot devices and that kind of stuff. Advanced chipset features. Gives you options for like spread spectrum and all that kind of stuff. CPU thermal throttling, all that kind of stuff. Integrated peripherals. This is where you will go in and enable stuff like the audio, the LAN, that kind of stuff, which actually this motherboard has the option for enabling or disabling the LAN in the overclocking section, which you'll see shortly. Power management setup. This is where you go in and set like your ACPI function and all that kind of stuff. I keep it set to S3 for suspended RAM, which I don't ever mess with this stuff. I keep it user defined. Don't let any of this stuff get enabled because, I mean, except for that right there, but stuff like the hard drive power down stuff because your operating system can handle that. Move on to plug and play PCI configurations. This is where you would set this kind of stuff, such as like your display first, which is PCI Express. Pretty much PC help status. This motherboard gives you lots of options here. This is the PC help status for controlling the fans. This board, what's pretty funny about this motherboard is that you can tell it, let's say you can tell it to turn fans off at certain temperatures, which this is as low as it goes on at 25 degrees Celsius. So if you get the fans plugged into the motherboard and the ambient temperature or the CPU temp or something is below 25 degrees Celsius, the fan will completely be shut off. Which is good for, let's say, you have a big heat pipe cooler like the one I got in the system, the Sunbeam Silent Whisper, which is modified. Heat pipe coolers can make great passive coolers when the ambient temperature is low. But anyway, as you see, the CPU fan is running very slow. At only, let's say, like around 1,000 RPMs. It speeds up and it slows down because it's going in between 25 degrees and 24. Like when it gets low, it gets blowed out, the CPU fan will usually slow down a little bit. It's kind of funny how this motherboard controls the fans. Like it just cut the fan completely off. But anyway, nothing to be worried about because it's not going to let your CPU overheat. But anyway, when I do the wintertime overclock, when I have it on the back porch, I'm going to have the fans running off the power supply, so that way I can keep air going across the coolers and get the lowest possible temperature. Anyway, moving on. Here's your overclocking options. This board gives you lots of options. This is your DRAM configuration. All sorts of options for timings, that kind of stuff. It gives you plenty of options for cranking down the memory bus from the CPU. So that way, you could have your CPU bus at 400 MHz and have your RAM still at 200 if you have this setting here. This is really nice. And the frontside bus frequency on this motherboard can go up to 456 MHz. If it was to be stable at that frequency at the stock multiplier, the CPU frequency would be 4.56 GHz. That's very, very high for the CPUs in this thing. That's normally running at 2 GHz. Anyway, moving on. These are pretty much your options for your hyper transport. As you see, it goes from 1 to 5. There's more options here. CPU frontside bus frequency ratio. You can crank the ratio down a bit to raise the frontside bus up but keep the same core frequency. I kind of wish you could raise the multiplier from 10, but that's okay. You can bring it down to bring your frontside bus up, which that's really good. Which on AMD CPUs is not really a frontside bus, it's just your system bus. Hyper transport bus, whatever you want to call it. And like on NVIDIA chipsets, your AGP or PCI Express bus is separate from the CPU and RAM bus. This board gives you several options for voltage control. You can go in here and set a particular number. It goes up to 1.5. Let's say you set it at 1.55. You can go into the special control and even bump it up even more. You can add another 36% to the voltage. That's really nice. It gives you really a bunch of options. You can chipset, hyper transport, that kind of stuff. This is where you would enable and disable the LAN. The FireWire and the gigabit LAN, which this board has dual gigabit LAN, I believe. And this board also gives you the option to run MemTest86 without even having a boot device. This is very, very handy. That way you don't have to burn a CD or write a floppy disk or that kind of stuff just to test your memory. Very, very handy feature. And what else is nice about this motherboard, it gives you options to save 4 different custom CMOS options. Let's say you can set an option with stock clocks. I could save an option with a good stable overclock for in here in this room, which is pretty warm. And I could save a third option for outside on the back porch when it's about 10 degrees outside, 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And even another option if I want to. Very nice feature. Of course, you can load drop by defaults, set your passwords, all that kind of stuff. Board has a really good BIOS. Here's a quick overview on the computer right quick, which will be probably some changes to the system. And when I do the wintertime overclock, I'm going to have the door off and have that fan over there. I'll probably have that fan blowing cold air into the system. Have some extra fans blowing across the motherboard to keep things cool, so on and so forth. But there you have it. There's the computer for Winter Overclock 2010.